So here we moved to Beirut, and this is a project that I just finished and actually started again in Beirut, and it's just located here by the port area. I think many of you have seen this white bride a lot in the news. It was the part of the explosion. And this building is sitting like along that port area. It's an area also that is really has been renovated. A lot of artists have been having their studio there. And in Beirut, it's for me the city of layers. It's a city that is constantly in transformation. I like this photo of Joe Kesirwani. He's a photographer, and he takes these kind of pool of concrete that you see along the water. It was also a city of life because there's always a lot of fireworks happening, a lot of parties. You would just go party all night and enjoy in Beirut. It's a city that had lived like very much like Rome, and a lot of parts of Italy is the whole layers of history. So it was an ancient city that lived the Babylonian rule. It went to the classical period with the Roman rule and Hellenistic rule. It then went to the medieval period with the Ottoman Empire just ruling that area. Then again, the colonial with the French Mandate, and until the creation of the Republic of Lebanon in 1943. So the city also had, in the past, before the 1900s, this is how we see the landscape of Beirut with these Venetian type of houses. And the emirs at that time, the Ottoman emirs really liked architecture and traveled, made the architects travel from Italy and bringing these kind of typologies. And we see that also in the urban fabric of the city that completely transformed from the city center towards the exterior and grew all through the times. And until the French rule came and the French Mandate, I would say, in 1923, and the city became much more structured. And then afterwards, the rehabilitation of the city center here and the encroachment of part of the company that rehabilitated the city center over the water. So the port area is just here, just for reference. And if we zoom more closely, we see like this kind of gridded city of the Roman times. And then afterwards, the Mamluk Sultanate that just completely intersected on the gridded city. And this is where, when we dig down, actually, we find a lot of Roman remainings. And then afterwards, with the French rule, like much more gridded, like large axes and this kind of star-shaped development. So this kind of layers are very much expressed months ago in the city, where you would see actually all these kind of small houses that remain from the Ottoman rule, these like developers, towers that are just a repetition of the same plan rising the city, and everything like really cohabiting together in a kind of creative chaos. There was also a lot of problems with these houses that being destroyed, no kind of heritage plan to protect them. And at the same time, these kind of situations with extreme crisis and poverty. And this is just the photo actually I took from the building. And looking down, and you would see people just squatting these areas. So by the port of Beirut, and this is the location of the project, and we are here like on the site where the first factory of concrete was constructed. So this is the old building that existed on the site where the tower had emerged. And it's a site that a photographer, a French-Lebanese photographer, had inherited from his father, who was a famous architect and who never wanted him to be a photographer, but he, like at some point, inherited this land. And he's a photographer also that took Beirut during the wartime. So, and what is interesting, in '92, he produced that book with Gabriel Basilico, René Bourri, Raymond Depardon, and Robert Funk. So they came to Beirut, and there's a whole movie really interesting about their encounter and just moving around the city center and taking these photos of this skeleton building and this kind of massive materiality that just exists in the city center, and it's a product of war, but at the same time it just instigates a kind of amazing melancholy, but an amazing also sense of creativity at the same time. So I was faced with all these images, with what I had grown with this archaeology, but at the same time with the history of the site, with the memory of the father, with these images of Beirut, and this kind of capacity of architecture to become material or just skeleton as a human being. This also for me paralleled what we find underground, and these are photos that I took in Beirut of many of the archaeological sites that just emerge every time one constructs, and they quickly disappear afterwards because, of course, nobody wants to say that we have an archaeology. They want just to rise their towers. And then the site itself, when it's close to the water part, so there weren't any kind of archaeology when we dug in, but we dig in very deeply, so in a way the building really emerges from the below ground. So when I started the design of that project, the first approach for me was just to kind of create a mass that in a way expresses the building regulation and the absurdity of the building regulation. And then from that mass, the question of the opening held for me a lot of meanings, like how do we open in Beirut when in a way, the opening means a lot of things. It means death. It means, at the same time, a kind of instigator of new life, of renewal. It also means ruin, nature coming, overcoming like this kind of ruined spaces and taking control of our urban environment. So it came natural that this kind of openings have to kind of be havens for life, places of nature, places also for a new way and new typology of living. As if it's a rock that is just like allowing nature to come over it. And these openings became like different sizes of gardens for me. Like at some point they are large gardens where like they become meeting points between the inhabitants, or like small planters within the openings. And through this kind of asymmetry of the carving, the whole typology of the floor plan, and this is the housing building with a gallery on the lower part here, the typology of the floor plan kind of transformed because every apartment became different. While in Beirut, all the apartments look the same, and this is how we construct it, like it dictates the same social structure. Everyone has to enter here, live here, sleep here. So in a way, it's just allowed for every like level to become different, and that the individual that will buy this apartment will just rearrange it in their way of living. So this is the model, like testing these openings. And then the construction happened, and this is a whole, like the tower is of concrete construction, so it's a concrete skeleton. Beirut is very seismic, so it had been buried 7 times, so all the structure had to be seismic resistance. And during the like first shell of the building, it was very interesting because it's kind of concrete, like just brutally like expressed. And at some point, the client tells me, "It's wonderful. Let's stop. Like here, it's really nice, please." And I was like, "Wait and see." And then, of course, I had this discussion. We were talking about clients and how we exchange with clients. But yeah, I mean, we had the discussion like to convince him to go on the next step because I wanted this building to express Earth, really, to be part of the ground. But these moments were very special because the workers just appropriated that building and started creating their welding workshops, whatever other spaces in. And these are photos that I took during construction where you see like this kind of like formwork that just exists on the concrete, and then leveling the ground also looked like an installation. These are photos of Takuji Shimura, who's a Japanese photographer who took the site process. And then at some point also creating frames towards the city, opening up in different ways, so every apartment has a different framing of that city. But the question of photography also was brought into the inside of the apartments, so the city became a photo framed through the window. So every time you would really frame a certain part of this chaos of Beirut that is always endless. And then moving into the smallest opening in the toilet and just framing other parts. So the ground floor is a foundation. So this is a foundation that was open for like Middle Eastern image. And we could see here the first exhibition was with Irving Penn. And this, and the inside, actually, the client said, "Okay, you want to continue build the facade? We will keep the inside here like as concrete." So we kept it. And then the process of the facade started emerging, and it was all about the experiment, like how to make that envelope and have this expression of earth. But at the same time, for me, it was a kind of involvement, or like a will to involve artisans, and many of the workers were fleeing from war in Syria, and I wanted them part of that project. So the whole challenge was just to kind of express that earth, that very fertile earth that just comes over the whole facade, as if it's an archeology that is in the city. And it started with me experimenting with my team in the office and doing these small clay models that I just scratched in a fork and started scaling them. Like, how would this, for example, relate to a person? And then testing that on site. Of course, the conditions are out of my control. And then trying different colors and different, tests. And then I drew like a chisel. It's like a comb on the scale of the building, 3.5 meters high, that would just be put on the facade and would be just dragged over with this almost vernacular technique, because it's like a plastering, and then done on the facade. I screamed a lot on the security of the site, but no one heard me because it's Beirut. It's like, oh, this is normal, but I couldn't do anything. And then of all the corners, they did really a great job with that. And it's like a healing process. It's as if, it's like as if it's a psychological process to kind of comb the building. And bit by bit, it started to have its presence. And the opening also, it's kind of a way or a critique about all the glazing that is happening in a Mediterranean city where it's very hot in the summer. Why would we need a very large glazing while we can really frame the outside with just what's needed? Of course, here is the openings of the toilets, so I wouldn't open this in the living. But it's creating a thermal mass for the building itself and reducing also the need of energy consumption. And then the moment of delivering happened, and I was very lucky that Domus magazine just asked Iwan Ban to go just before the shutdown of the coronavirus to go to Beirut and take photos because they wanted to publish. So these were the last photos I had of the building, and then we started seeing it emerge, the glazing finished, and then the relationship with the context. Of course, here what you see, this kind of brutality also of the height, this is because of the building regulation that allows to go very high with the construction factor. So this guy here, if he destruct his or her building, then they can also emerge very high and close the facade here. So, but at the same time, also the decision was, instead of just emerging an individual block, is to kind of embrace the neighbors, really be close to them. And then from this side is just like getting hit by the gabarit, by the ground, by the urban regulation. and simply exists itself as a amorph building, what I called it. And then kind of dialogue with some absurd situations of Beirut. And this is where I felt at some point the building had a spirit. It could, it could say things, and it has this kind of relationship with the ground where the nature is coming through. And then the finish is just going all the way. And at some points, with these kind of breaks in the volume, the balconies become like just viewing points to the rest of the city. And one journalist actually visiting the building told me, did you build this because you imagined that the water would raise until this part and this becomes a ground? Probably, but it's interesting reflection. And the entrance point, it's just a simple place where we have, I had this idea of this oculus, like this kind of simulation of natural light within a small entrance part. This is a photo in the gallery space. And then moving to the apartments is always a relation with nature and like a kind of a vernacular feel as well, like within that space and grounding almost. So like here you could see also how the window become almost like a frame of a photo. So this is a view of the city behind. It's one of the apartments. And then some tension points also framing other architectures and the nature growing slowly in the building. And then suddenly, on the 4th of August, actually the past met the future. I was always talking about the archaeology of the future, and that point was completely surreal because for me the past that had always, in a way, was a creative force for me, like to come over what one has lived, became a point of bringing the building into its initial state. So the explosion just happened close by. And that was the last photo I took before the explosion. I was sitting by the waterside. And then it just destructed all the neighborhood that was close by the port. Unfortunately, that was a neighborhood where a lot of these Ottoman houses still exist. And they were rather well conserved because they were, surviving the war. And at the moment, they just like hit them completely. So a lot of thinking today of how to reconstruct and how to rebuild this heritage. It's also moments where you see really the traditional technique of construction of these houses, all the marble, the materials, the beautiful materials. It just reveals this kind of openings and rooms. But at the same time, this is not a very alien view for me because I grew up with this and with this idea of the city as a section. Even if, of course, it's melancholic, but it's somehow humans get to conceptualize what we see. And then with this part that was, sorry, the videos are not working, but I will move on. And then the Macron arriving to Beirut. I don't know if he saw the building, actually. And he's up there. And this was the chaos. And I arrived there in the foundation just like the next day morning to see what happened. It was really surreal, like imagining that the fragility of everything. Like, look at the door itself became like a cardboard, completely destroyed. And all the parts, like all the aluminum was shattered. And actually here I met, this is Abu Abdallah, he's the guy who did the facade. So he was really proud because the building facade was intact. And he did all the metal work, and he was just showing me that actually all the metal work that he did was not touched. They gave me these pictures showing like fish that was tossed off the waters. Some of the apartments that were destroyed and the glass shattered. So the building itself, the skin of it really was intact, just like everything around was a complete apocalypse with these chatters. And then at that point, I thought actually, instead I built a bunker. I didn't build a building, I built a bunker for the inhabitants to be, shielded within and have the least glass open to the outside. And somehow this kind of scenes also made me think that what happens in any place in the world is really tightly linked to the rest of the world. Everything is a balance today, and we're responsible to the climate change. We're responsible to this balance of the world that had to keep optimism and through our constructions. So this is how we see the facade today. Of course, the glazing is off, and the tenants are now trying to see how to fund reconstruction. And this is like the building is just staying with its own integrity at the moment. And I think a new story is to rewrite again on that project. Thank you.